Everyone. Welcome to Thursday's episode of Crypto with English. Now, I'll preface today's episode as such. I've been particularly excited about this episode all month. Now, I'd like to introduce to you all, a friend, a brother, and a fellow colleague in this space, Shadrack
Yes.
Kubyane. Now, he is known as Africa's blockchain baron. And by the way, that is not a name or designation that is given lightly. He is the co-founder of Coronet blockchain. Now, this is a B2B, B2C marketplace that uses and leverages blockchain technology into the form of really a transparent and agile supply chain structure. So, with whichever product you get, you have access and you can see where the product is coming from, how it's made from soup to nuts. So this project, this platform, this project is catering to Africa's beauty and salon sector. So it has an incredible amount of promise, not just in Africa, but I believe everywhere else. In this day and age, you're seeing many of the practical use case mass adoption happening in Western Africa and in South Africa. People are using blockchain technology and crypto in their everyday lives, which is ultimately what is going to make this sector successful. Shadrack and his wife, who's also the co-founder, Pretty, who, by the way, thank you. Special thanks to you, by the way, for also helping this introduction between me and Shadrack as well. Based out of South Africa, they're doing some incredible things right now. We're going to get into the weeds of it today. So, Shadrack, thank you very much for coming on today.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Adam. And you know what? A shout out to the audiences of Crypto with English. It's great to have this fire chat family gathering,
Yeah, yeah,
reunion, get
exactly.
together, and I'm glad that they could join us as well. Looking forward to an exciting chat ahead.
Right. So, one of the things that we're dealing with is the supply chain crisis right now. And I
Yeah.
do think part of that problem, and problems really cause loss of money, is lack of transparency. Perhaps we can avoid a lot of problems by actually seeing and actually having access and visibility to how items and products are moving through the supply chain. So, Shadrack, tell us all a little bit more about Coronet blockchain.
Brilliant. Thank you kindly. Thank you so much. You know, Coronet blockchain was born out of a need to solve the category level challenges of the hair salon sector and how that even landed up on our desk. Historically, I come from the management consulting background, with my last role being with Deloitte. And of course, I went head into consulting within the management consulting space, growing and bringing to market new solutions and also scaling existing entities or projects. For about 10 years, I did that. But among my last flagship projects was basically my ex-colleague from Deloitte who ended up in our office. And talking about Pretty, kind of like aligning us, Pretty put in a good word for her because she was solving the kind of a problem that myself and the team would not touch at the moment. It was talk about getting into the crosshairs of an industry. It was a hair equation where she's selling human hair extensions out of a handbag, and she goes like, "Can you put systems in place? Can you legitimize my operation? And
Right.
can you basically align me and pave the runaway for growth?" I'm thinking, sounds exciting, but you are existing in the informal sector. That is a
Yeah.
sector that I even joke sometimes that angels don't dare to tread in that sector because they wouldn't
Right.
even dare go there. But you know what? My wife said, you know what? Let's give it a try. Let her trade out of our office. Let her kind of like let's just put some structure to the
Right.
some method to the madness. Put some structure, and we gave it a try. And long story short, 36 months later, my team has evolved her from her handbag into 4 branches that were
Wow.
bricks and mortar. And 2 of those were set up inside 5-star hotels, including the Radisson Blue. And the other one was Marriott Hotels International. So right here on African soil, she was able to see not just traction with her brand and positioning and just a premium look and feel and hiring 40 staff, but a cherry on top, she was moved from $500 to $2 million revenue a year, just
Wow.
like that. So that made a couple of headlines. That got a lot of
Yeah, I
people's
can
attention.
imagine.
Yeah,
That is
so
incredible.
people were sitting up and saying, we want in on this. Salons were saying, we need this magic pill. And that's why I said, everyone hold your horses. Right. There's no magic pill to growth, at least growth that is sustainable. This was a unique case. Give us a little bit. And we took about 18 months. We took about 18 months looking at the entire industry's moving parts. And we found that what we call the hair silk route, meaning that corridor from India, that is like the hub for human hair extension supplies from the India temples into China, into Italy, and making its way into Africa. That is a $7 billion corridor just into Africa alone. And that's a secondary market. The US, which is a #1 market, it's even above that tier. So when we look at that, we go like, no. We need a category level solution. We shouldn't kind of like solve it. We should really go for the jugular. And that's where during a dinner conversation with some of our friends from IBM, and one of them went like, listen, I think blockchain is tailored to really solve the category level challenges of this sector. And therefore, it will pave the runway to legitimize salons at scale. It will pave the runway for incoming manufacturers to access Africa within a trustworthy channel. And it will also, last but not least, it will also solve the counterfeiting that happens in the industry because of the 100 million human hair pieces that exchange hands among 24 million women in Africa. 38% of them are counterfeit. I mean, it's a luxury item. It's a luxury item. So long story short, we raised 2 funding tranches from IBM, who are also our technical build partner. And as we are doing that during COVID, we did that during COVID. As we are doing that, we're now getting calls from as far as Canada, who are saying we need to evolve our use case to now come into agriculture, to change the game for smallholder farmers on the African continent. We've got 33 million of those on African soil. So you can imagine how busy my 2022 schedule looks as
I can imagine.
Yeah,
so it seems like with this. Yeah, so it seems like this project, you and your team, you and your wife have also built essentially a decentralized Silk Road of sorts for for hair and hair extension products. So going off of that, just from some of my research before hopping onto this, so the beauty and salon industry globally is a multi-billion-dollar industry in the hundreds of billions if you were to take in East Asia, the US, Latin America, Africa. So, and hair extensions in particular do occupy a big space in those numbers. So how important is it for customers to really know the source of, let's say, whatever type of hair product and hair extension that they have? Like, in your experience, is that actually like a really big concern for customers? Like, where is this coming from? How legit is this? Things like that.
Very good question, because we've got a tale of 2 market segments, in the words of the William Shakespeare, a tale of 2 cities. We've got we've got a tale of 2 geographies, on the European side, Europe, and even as we go to Australia, the first world market, it's a lot more ahead in terms of consumer expectations. So when we speak to them, because we've got some of the manufacturers from those geographies, we even have a manufacturer we've got a distributor from Canada. So we've got some exciting people. That market, first world, they speak ethical sourcing. They speak human rights. They go like, you know what? I don't want to be wearing my crown. They call their hair a crown. I don't want to be wearing my crown where else somebody kind of like had their human rights violated in the process. So I need to know. I need to wear my crown with a clear conscience. I need to know that it was ethically sourced. There was no one coerced. And also, from an ethical sourcing as well, talking about things like cancer and all those unwanted elements from a health perspective. I also want to know that There are no chemical agents that were added to these products along the value chains that could actually seep into my own skull. So that's first world. However, even though those concerns are valid for Africa, they are secondary. The first and foremost primary concern in Africa, we actually did during our due diligence before we deploy, we found that on average, an African woman would spend anywhere between $290 to $500 per look, or for the one unit. You see? So it kind of like places it up there with smartphones and other luxury items. So they're concerned because not all of them can afford that kind of a bill comfortably. So they are more concerned of, is this a counterfeit or is this a real deal? So while both the tale of two market expectations or two market segments, while both their expectations are valid, it takes blockchain to kind of like patrol the entire value chain from source to consumer, and kind of like monitoring every touch point through track and trace transparency mechanism. We are basically solving two market problems using the same configuration. So we are solving the ethical sourcing. We are also helping to hold manufacturers accountable in terms of their internal quality assurance processes, that they don't smuggle horsehair in there, they don't smuggle dangerous chemicals in there, and they also don't ill-treat their own factory workers. So we are solving that human rights violation, what do you call it, a dynamic. We are also solving the counterfeiting, because the stamp of trust, if you look at Coronet, the logo resembles a stamp. So that stamp of trust, where you see it on the product, where you see it on the outlet, where you see it on a truck, then you know that that item is the original item that left the source, and two, has been ethically sourced. So that's the tale of two markets.
Wow. And by the way, that is a very good way of explaining it, to say the very least. So going off of that, and perhaps to hammer this point, a little bit, farther, what types of I guess you could say sanitary problems can arise if, let's say, you don't know the source of, let's say, the hair extension product? Like, because I would imagine, whether it's, I think, counterfeit, or whether this is from a source that is not verified, you're still putting this on your scalp. So I wanted to know, from a health and sanitary, I guess, sanitary point of view, what kind of problems can people experience if, let's say, they get a product that is not what it purports to be?
Absolutely. That's a very good question. And to start on the health angle, we are in an era, or we are in a season where there's a whole lot of variants from a COVID perspective that are being picked up. So let me start with that. If you receive a package and the seal on it says that this particular hair unit or wig unit was, I'm gonna mention the most basic. No, unless you can actually take your smartphone and basically interact with the packaging through a QR code, and you can see the hair journey. You can see the hair journey, that at what point was it sanitized, how much of sanitizer was used on this particular unit, and at which touch point was it reopened at the airport. I mean, a product can leave China, be processed in Italy, and make its way to South Africa, or make its way to Nairobi, Kenya. However, at the airport, how do you know if the same package was not opened by the IRS, and then they had to inspect certain things, but in that process they contaminated it? And if you don't know, you would think that, well, what left India and was processed in a what do you call it, in a very controlled factory environment, it stayed that way. But the next one, how do you know if there was no contamination at the salon floor? Because when the batch is in the salon, it still comes in bundle format, like 3 or 4 bundles. When they are put together, the stylist will have to weave them into a complete look. How do you know if that stylist is, one, vetted and qualified and certified to actually build wig units. And how do you know that that stylist has adhered to COVID protocols, number one, excuse me, and two, all other hygiene protocols? And then here's the next hygiene level. There is a tendency to use a chemical called silicone in order to disguise the various types of hair. I'll tell you why they use silicone.
Yeah, I was going to say why. I mean, that's very interesting, but
I'll tell you why they use silicone. There's something called temple hair or Remy hair. Now, Remy hair or temple hair means it was sourced from the temple during the routine devotee visit to the Hindu temples in India. So what falls on the floor, basically when the babas are busy shaving the hair of the devotees, up to 3,500 devotees can visit a temple in a day. So while that hair is being shaved, when it falls on the floor, it's considered Remy hair. However, the good stuff is now sourced and now auctioned off in the other room. And during those auctions, you want to be able to monitor and follow that entire supply chain. What remains behind did not make it to the auctions. Sometimes is gathered off the floor, and now that is compromised. Number one. Number two, at hair salons throughout the world, hair can be gathered from different sources. Now that's not good hair. And even in the industry, there's something called virgin hair. Virgin doesn't mean that, you know, virgin oil was used in the hair, or is that there's a virgin donor. No. When the description virgin hair, it refers to a single donor. It's a single source. So a single source is good. I'll tell you why. Our hair, the way it is configured, the cuticles are facing a certain way. So like when I shaved my hair earlier on, when you shave, the hair from the roots, the ends will look different from the hair that was on the outward side. But when you combine different hair from different sources, you find that it's actually crisscrossing, and therefore it has a potential to tangle a lot more. So that's a problem, because it's never going to stay together. When you buy it new, it's a wig unit, it looks brilliant. But if you've got like 3 or 4 sources, the cuticles are actually facing the other way. So the minute you comb it, or you sleep, or you do whatever with it, it starts to tangle. So silicone is used to almost coerce it into behaving as though it's from a single donor. That's number one.
Wow, okay.
Also give it a bouncy, shiny look. So, and also silicone also disguises any synthetic elements that could have been added to the inferior quality hair. So all of those things, once now silicone sits on your head and maybe it's raining or something, for some reason, there's a bit of sweat, it starts to seep into your scalp. And that is a recipe, a concoction for disaster from an oncology perspective, where you could contract cancer, you could get all these sorts of, or even skin infections, apart from COVID, apart from all those other things. So so there are some harmful chemicals that traditionally, before blockchain, the supply chains, the players in the supply chain have been adding it in there to boost their bottom line and to do a whole lot of things. So that makes it dangerous. Last but not least, for religious purposes, I'm not sure if just to make your the crypto with English audiences aware. In the same way that hair is donated for religious purposes, mainly in India, of course, Brazil is in there for non-religious, just for commercial. China is in there for commercial reasons. Argentina, Russia. But their volumes are quite small. So when I say commercial, it means they come and sell their hair. They go like, you shave this 30 inches, 40 inches and give me X amount. So they're able to trade. China is trading, Brazil and the others, but India is donating. So apart from the donations being responsible for 80% of the world's hair trade, that is not where it ends. In the same way that women, children and men are donating for religious reasons, when you look at the Jewish faith, women are wearing wigs that are made out of human hair for religious reasons. But in all due respect to their religion, they cannot wear hair units that come from India's temples. And that is due to the sacredness and basically their belief system. So how do you know? Maybe you're a Jewish woman in New York and you're on Wall Street. How do you know if your hair did not come from Turkey? It actually came from India. So the trust and the transparency of the supply chain, from a hygiene, from a health, and even from an ethical sourcing, no human rights violation, but also that your own set of beliefs are not violated at all by unscrupulous suppliers.
That's very important as well.
Yeah.
Wow, that was a lot of substance. Thank you. That was great, actually. And I was gonna ask a question that ties into your explanation. So, what's the history behind why a lot of the hair extension supply comes from India? And I know you touched on the religious significance. Could you go into some of that?
Absolutely. You know, India is a fascinating place because for thousands of years, India's culture and belief system has always been inclined towards donations of hair, especially between amongst the Hindu, Tamil, and similar belief systems. But it has not always been for the hair trade. You'll be quite surprised. The original use cases of the donated hair was for agricultural fertilizers. That's one. Number two, hair is still being used as fertilizers today. It was also what's the other one? For making of mattresses, for just stuffing the mattresses. But one day, someone had an epiphany when the hair extensions trade was taking off. This is around the 40s, 50s. And the reason I'm pointing to that is around the same time that Hollywood or Broadway was beginning to boom. That's around the time that hair extensions were becoming popular. So fast forward to the early 2000s or mid 2000s, keeping up with the Kardashians had something to do with cosmetic surgery, but it also had to do with the quality of your wig and the bounciness of your curls or inches. But if you go back to the era of Marilyn Monroe, you realize that the more television and Hollywood was kind of like becoming a norm in our homes, then the women were like, I need my hair to bounce like that. Then the demand just went up. However, when Zuckerberg and the crew brought Facebook onto the grid, when MySpace came onto the grid and social media was taking off, it was no longer keeping up with the Kardashians. It was keeping up with my neighbors. It was keeping up with everybody.
Right.
So the religious purposes or donation reasons are still there, but I would safely say 90% plus of all the hair that is donated from India's temples it actually finds its way into the hair trade. The demand is so huge. Hence, being a luxury item, some unscrupulous players, that's why we need blockchain, have been augmenting the product with maybe horse hair, maybe synthetic hair and things like that. But the religious reasons, they still remain. Maybe you're wondering, what do people donate for? Do you know what's funny about the hair donation? The poorest citizen in India could be going to the same temple that is frequented by the richest, meaning hair has a weird thing of actually closing the gap in society because of a belief system. They believe that they have to kind of like donate to the gods because of a covenant that the family has for generations with a certain set of gods. That's one. Number two, another religious tangent or another religious belief set there is that whenever the Indian community anywhere in the world, whenever they are mourning, they actually to display their mourning and go through their mourning, they actually have to shed their hair off. So there's about 5 or 7 reasons that hair is donated for religious purpose, or even coming of age, and things like that. So yes, that's a vast set of reasons at the point of origin. But what has changed in the last 5, 6, 7 decades is the repurposing of what the hair is used to. And I think on the last point, talking about Hollywood, in the early 90s, there used to be a whole lot of secrecy around. You know how on the I think it's at Joan Rivers, the late Joan Rivers.
Yeah.
who
Yeah,
passed
Joan
on.
Rivers, yeah.
She created the culture of asking people on the red carpet, "Who are you wearing?" So
Yeah,
she's
that's
the
right.
one,
Yeah, that's
she's the
right.
one who pioneered
That
that,
was like one of her
that
major,
culture.
I guess you could say, talking points and shticks, so to say. She would put
There
people
we
on the
go.
spot like that. Yeah.
There we go. But what has been hush hush for a very long time is, who are you wearing on your head? You see, people were
Right.
actually speaking from the neck down, right up until the Christian Dior shoes, everything. But nobody
Right.
was discussing this. So that culture is changing a bit because the likes of Nicki Minaj and what do you call it, other stars are coming. These are my inches, and the next moment they'll take off the hair on Instagram. So it's becoming less of a secrecy that I'm
Right.
actually wearing a wig. I'm actually wearing a wig. I wear a wig just like how I would wear that designer dress or that designer dress. So
Right.
I think with the adoption of social media, it has lowered the wall, especially among women. But we haven't gotten it on the red carpet yet. So I'm thinking of flying out my team to the next Oscars so that they can ask, "Who are you wearing on your
That would be
crown?"
awesome.
So that's what we're looking at. Yeah. So that's in a nutshell the brief history of how we got here.
That is awesome. And you know what? I actually met Joan Rivers once at the airport, actually. So it's great you actually threw that story in. I was on vacation and I actually met her at when I was picking up my luggage. It was very strange. It was very cool though.
Yeah, she was legend.
Yeah, she's hilarious.
Yes.
You know, to
I
say the
remember
very
she
least.
made an example of how each time Hollywood sent a limo to pick her up for the Grammys or for any of the events, she will always send them a thank you note, even right up until her last days. And they were always shocked. They said, "You are Joan Rivers. You're a big name." She said, No. My parents taught me manners. So if you're going to send a driver to pick me up, I need to send that thank you note.
Right. Yeah, you know, from interviews that I've seen and just kind of meeting her just briefly once at the airport, you don't get any type of arrogance from her. She was very nice, very down to earth, very plain spoken. So,
yeah,
that's awesome.
Yes.
And, you know, now that we're talking about, I guess you could say, the sources of hair, on the
Yes.
flip side, counterfeit hair. What are the
Yes.
sources of counterfeit hair? I believe you mentioned horsehair. And
Yeah.
and I guess generally speaking, people will introduce silicone in it to mask the properties of the quality of hair. So as far as counterfeit hair, what tends to be the source of it?
You know, it's interesting. I think to discuss counterfeiting in the hair industry, let's see it from a contamination perspective. So
Sure.
the contamination point, I'm just gonna take the audiences through the hair silk route. So at the temple point, where hair is actually gathered and auctioned off, there isn't much counterfeiting there from a contamination perspective. But beyond the auctions, when the hair brokers, that I'll call them, when the hair vendors or hair brokers move that hair to the warehouse where it is awaiting to be purchased by the manufacturers that come from outside the country, there is too large a temptation between the temple and the warehouse to not smuggle in there some other elements that are of an inferior quality or that are not even hair at all. Maybe horsehair, maybe synthetic plastics can be smuggled in there. That's one. The second contamination point or a security breach from a quality perspective is between the warehouse and the port of exit out of India. And India, strange enough, also battles. I mean, there's all these trucks that go into China, and there's all these consignments that head towards Italy. Those two are the major manufacturing hubs, even though other hubs exist elsewhere. So en route, there's like way too many kilometers in between without a stamp of trust, without an immutable lock and key. There's just way too much temptation. That's one. However, to be fair, I would say our findings show that more than 50% of the contamination happen in the factories themselves. because when raw hair comes into the factory, it has to go through up to 18 stages, you know, to sort the cuticles, to clean it up, to align the ends, and to what do you call it, to rebundle it together, to sew the ends into a bit of a curtain, to roll that curtain into a bundle. That's quite a process. And also for the European market, to create what's called clip-ons. So in those 18 stages, a manufacturer might be tempted to bring something through the back door that comes from a totally different part of the world, and then masking this whole thing in order to ask for a premium. Because some of the most expensive hair units have been known to sell for up to $30,000 or more. So it's a luxury item, and it's a thing to die for. So yes, the factory. And then when you go beyond the factory, between the factory and the salon, there's like, I think to give you a summary, between the temple and the hairstylist or the hairdresser, there has been known to be up to 100 of hands that touch that hair. So 100 set of hands, that's way too big a margin. So sometimes the salon owners, they're the ones that are on the cold face or that are on the consumer facing. So almost all the B2C consumers, they think it's the salon who did it, but they don't realize that 80 to 90% margin for a compromise exists upstream, not at this last mile. But the salons are the one that get it the most. People think like, I bought it from your salon. So don't tell me about the invisible manufacturers I don't know. It's your name on the box, and hence without that Coronet stamp of trust, we wouldn't assure that salon owner some better sleep at night, you know. So we are modeling this, or rather we have configured it much similar to the halal certification stamp of approval. And the cautious. So that's why Coronet couldn't just be a blockchain solution. It had to be a stamp of trust enabled by blockchain.
I like that, stamp of trust. Wow. And, you know, especially nowadays, we're really starting to understand the importance of supply chains and transparency in supply chains. I could only imagine the amount of health crises, you know, delays, you know, I guess you could say financial losses that can be avoided with the transparent supply chain. You know, it will give you enough time to create solutions, and better yet, it's better to avoid problems than to have to react to them, especially as it comes to, you know, supply chains. And by the way, if let's say a shipment or numerous shipments come from a very questionable source, let's say when it comes to hair extensions, you can see that on the blockchain. You can stop that shipment, you know, all the way at the beginning, instead of having to deal with it once, let's say, third parties or, you know, customers start receiving, you know, and using these products as well.
And that last mile is too late. That last mile is too late to try and stop. And talking about picking up discrepancies through the algorithm and through the track and trace. Remember, what blockchain does, it creates not just a see-through supply chain, but a bit of a drive-through mechanism in order, because I'll give you an example. When we have finalized our very last modules, what that means is, let's say we're now shipping to the US in what do you call it? Let's say we're shipping to London at Heathrow. The custom duty officers, they should be able to see a specific consignment of hair come live on their grid as it leaves India, even while it's heading to Italy. They must be able to see it. And I'll tell you why it must come live on their grid while it's destined for Heathrow or while it's destined for OR Tambo, meaning in Johannesburg, South Africa. They must see it live because the other how do I call it? The other discrepancies in the hair sector, I'll even call it some dodgy dealings, is that there's a lot of under-declaring of the consignment itself. Meaning that when a consignment leaves India, it's suddenly, no, that's just 4 tons of hair. Meanwhile, it could be 40 tons, you see? And then now it makes its way, when it reaches the manufacturing, it's 40 tons. And they might even add more padding there to add other, what do you call it, unwanted stuff. When it reaches South Africa or when it reaches New York, they now under-declared again. So if it doesn't come live on the customs duties grid by way of back-end integrations, then what do you call it? The customs or IRS will lose out on using smart contracts to automate the payment, because a smart contract pays the distributor, pays the manufacturer, and must pay the customs
Right.
framework once the end user customer actually interacts with the product and goes like, listen, I'm quite happy, I like what I got, then the payments must be automated through smart contracts. So for as long as smart contracts are not deployed in specific IRS geographies, then they've got blind spots, and they will frustrate and delay the logistics process, supply chain flow, because they'll say, no, we need to open this particular container here, because remember, hair would behave a bit like drugs on the scanner because it's a biomaterial. So whenever hair comes in, it's actually very high risk item to move around the globe, because it's actually a biomaterial. If you're talking synthetic hair, you're talking plastic. So plastic, it will pass through very much quicker, but plastic hair will only last you a month. But human hair extensions, you're looking at a no bad hair day for 3 to 5 years when you take care of it. So obviously human hair extensions are sought after more than the plastic ones. So, but it's also not an easy item to handle from a supply chain perspective, especially if you are a regulator or you're a customs official. So what do you call it? Automating and inviting all the stakeholders on the grid so that they're looking at the same decentralized ledger according to the compartments or permissions that they're getting is why blockchain in this space is a game changer. That's a lot more superior than all the other siloed supply chain solutions.
That is awesome. And going off of that, could you elaborate on some of the, I guess, specifics in blockchain technology you're using for this? You know, smart contracts, or if you're using tokens in this system, or things like that.
Brilliant. So from a blockchain perspective, we are using track and trace as our main module. Track and trace has been configured to ensure that the blocks, they add up from the genesis block or point of origin right up until the end user, from B to C. Technically, it's actually from temple to business through the auction. So we just left out the temple part at this phase of the build. So from B to C, we have actually configured an alignment of that entire value chain through the track and trace. And because we needed a marketplace, the second solution component that we've put in place is an e-commerce marketplace, because the salons are being capacitated to order hair from manufacturers or order hair from licensed distributors, all on the same ledger. So that's the e-commerce component. And of course, the smart contract component enables that payments are only released once the last mile expectations have been fulfilled. And just to put it out there in terms of smart contracts, in a traditional supply chain, from an international trade, we'll be speaking banking facilities that take care of escrow. So escrow will be able to hold the funds until the end user or the end recipient is happy with what I say. But in this case, the escrow itself is held within the, what do you call it, the smart contract functionality, whether they're using fiat currencies or in our additional build, we are actually creating a Coronet token so that everything can just be incorporated within the same framework. So from a blockchain perspective, even though the consumers don't really see how the system works or how it's configured, they know that through a QR code interaction, they're able to pick up that hair story and the hair journey, where it has been, much similar to how you would monitor how far your Uber driver is. So they're able to pick up that. So they may not know the bells and whistles from the blockchain perspective, but they're definitely, from a pilot perspective, loving the blockchain benefits.
Right, and from a coding, from a coding perspective, what coding languages were used in making some of this?
We've actually having IBM being our technical partner, and the initial
using Hyperledger, or
it's Hyperledger. It's Hyperledger Fabric. So yes, however, I need to add this one because we have got demand from other localities such as Canada. Canada has come in to say, could we evolve our solution or our blockchain superpowers, that's what they called it, into the food supply chain for the 3 million farmers in Africa. So when we looked at that, we are currently looking at quite an agile mechanism with a number of blockchain players, blockchain infrastructure frameworks in the market. We are in talks as we go into 2020. So we may or may not build our our modular for food security. We may not build it on the Hyperledger fabric. We may play around with a few toys, but nonetheless, our current one is Hyperledger.
Awesome. Yeah, Hyperledger is particularly good for any type of enterprise type use case project. So, yeah, I would certainly say Hyperledger is definitely among the top. To say the very least. And as far as yes, no, continue.
We looked at the use case between Walmart and IBM in terms of IBM Food Trust, and that's one of the simulations that we were able to adopt into our Coronet build.
That's awesome. And as far as 2022, what do you have in store as far as Coronet blockchain and maybe some of the benchmarks and goals you hope to achieve?
Brilliant. 2022, talking about 2022, we tend to count Saturdays from that perspective. So, 2022 is only 54 Saturdays. So that is just a stopover, but we are more looking at the nexus between 2022 and 2030. That is where the Sustainable Development Goals 2030 are going to have to be reached. Hopefully the goalposts are not shifted. With blockchain being here, we can really ace a number of those goals, from a financial inclusion to increasing economic participation of women in supply chains in a tangible way. So Coronet at the moment fulfills about 8 of those 17 sustainable development goals. So that's the bigger picture. 2022 is just a stopover. However, in 2022, we are seeing more heads of states coming to the room to endorse and work with Coronet. That's one thing that is exciting. We've been doing for the last 18 months, we've been doing some innovation diplomacy or blockchain diplomacy on the continent of Africa, and that's beginning to pay off because the countries themselves are leaning forward to say we need a bit of the action. We need to really use blockchain via Coronet to really transform the game for some of our local economies. That's one. So we are seeing more participation. We are also seeing the food supply chain come into the Coronet fold as well. And I think in 2022, my team was just briefing me because we'll be closing this week. My team was briefing me that they've got a much bigger lineup of media roadshows that they have in mind. So we're just going to be engaging from a PR perspective, just make our presence felt. So we'll be having more dialogues, more conversations, more thought leadership, even parallel to rolling out and going to market with some of our solutions. And I think the third use case is regarding being an enabler for the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement, which has been a game changer as a policy, but it requires blockchain to attach wheels to that agreement in order to make sure that the power dynamics are balanced between the enterprise players and the small business type of players. The play field has to be leveled. And what better mechanism to use than blockchain as a see-through supply chain effect?
That's awesome. And going off of that, why is it that so many more practical use case projects are kind of already being put into action in Western and South Africa? People are already using different tools of blockchain in their everyday lives. I think whereas in the United States, for instance, blockchain is mostly just associated with cryptocurrency. And as far as that, the use is mostly as kind of an investment asset over here. I look at things happening overseas. People are using blockchain and cryptocurrency for, buying their groceries and buying the gasoline for their car. So that mass adoption is ultimately going to be what's going to make all of this successful. Why is it in Africa and, in parts of Latin America and other parts of the world, people have already been, I guess, maybe more adaptive and flexible to already doing this. Because if I was to go outside right now, I would probably have a hard time giving away cryptocurrency, despite the fact that, cryptocurrency, as a whole has greatly appreciated in value. So, what is it, let's say, maybe culturally or
Yes.
situationally that's going on in Western and South Africa where people are like, yeah,
Yes.
you know what? Let's use this. Let's use crypto and blockchain,
Yeah.
for my everyday shopping, for the everyday economy. Whereas, let's say
Yes.
here in the US, most people are not using cryptocurrency to
Yeah.
buy anything for the most part. So I'm kind of
So
wondering
that's a good
what's the
question.
backstory as far as
Yes.
Western and South Africa, as far as people moving or people being mobile and adaptable to that.
I think there are a number of forces at work that has seen Africa being uh, ahead of the value curve in terms of usability and just practicalizing both crypto and blockchain itself in that regard. The first one, I would say that convenience could sometimes be the enemy. That's the first one that I'll mention from the West, from the Western perspective.
Right.
If you look in the US, which I think it's fair to say is the landmark territory where credit card and just
Right.
that whole financial services
The whole
system
financial services economy, yeah.
with Visa and MasterCard leading the fold and others following. So I think while you had become accustomed, let me start with that one. While you had become accustomed to, let's call it plastic money. So
Sure.
while you were accustomed to plastic money, before I even come to Africa, China had a gaping hole as an emerging economy. I'm talking early 90s, mid 90s, and
Right.
early 2000s. China had a bit of a gaping hole, meaning they didn't have the legacy framework or legacy infrastructure from a financial services perspective. So now enters the fold where the likes of Jack Ma, that maverick, comes in from the US, from visiting the US. He comes in
Right.
there. Your AliExpress, your Alipay, your Ant Group, your Alibaba is beginning to take off, and now Tencent is coming in there with WeChat, which basically becomes this super app where you can basically live your entire life. It's strange because WeChat ended up leaning more towards the metaverse before the metaverse became a thing. You could do anything, buy groceries and pay for anything, even pay for traffic fines pay for traffic fines in China through WeChat. So
WeChat, yeah.
now there isn't plastic money in that. There isn't plastic money. That there is digital. What do you call it? There is a fintech dynamic before even digital currencies such as DeFi and cryptocurrencies came in there. There's fintech. So now you go to Kenya. Before I come to crypto or blockchain, you go to Kenya and you find that 80% of the country was kind of like unbanked in the early 90s, mid 90s, and that's where M-Pesa was able to solve that dynamic. M-Pesa meaning mobile money, and where even from a kid in varsity who's far away to what do you call it to maybe an individual in another country who wants to send a remittance, to even a granny in the rural Kenya, they all were able to really latch on and adapt quickly to mobile money. So the adoption metrics or the adoption curve in terms of crypto finding a more ready audience here in Africa, and also a more what do you call it an infrastructure deficit from a financial services perspective, and also the unbanked being the majority.
That's very important, yeah.
And let's not also leave out the ailing, unstable currencies. The naira being one of those. The what do you call it? These currency fluctuations have seen the citizens of Nigeria, Ghana, and also South Africa and elsewhere kind of like. It's interesting. South Africa is a bit of a different dynamic in terms of that, because We have a fairly stable financial services sector here, from banking to insurance to credit, unlike the rest of Africa. I mean, here in South Africa, you could basically buy a home that is worth what, 5 million US dollars on credit. But that, my friends in West Africa, they will laugh at me because they can't even buy anything for $1,000 upwards on credit. Everything is cash. So you've got this dynamic in the rest of Africa outside of SA. You've got this very, what do you call it? You've got this very cash intense economy, whereby it's a lot safer now from a personal security with all the kidnappings in Nigeria and stuff like that. It's a lot safer for you to transact here than carry loads and loads of cash. And also the naira, I think the naira at the moment is 520 or 510 to the dollar, or so, maybe at most 540. Now, would you rather carry maybe what 20 million naira, or would you rather carry that cash in a cryptocurrency format?
Right.
So the crypto or the fiat or the dollar tends to be be a lot more attractive. However, the fiat currencies, the Central Bank of Nigeria and other central banks on the continent have kind of like heavily regulated them and created all these bottlenecks whereby it's not easy for you to convert from the naira to the dollar, US dollar, and vice versa. You can, but there's a couple of hoops that you have to jump. So that's where as a hammer seeking a nail, Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies found a readily available nail in terms of a market that was really, really quite fed up with all these bottleneckings, red tape, and also and also the safety concerns that existed in that kind of a domain. Yeah, in South Africa, we've got Luno, we've got Vala, we've got other players that have really, really been early adopters from an enterprise perspective. Now Luno have moved their offices from South Africa, Cape Town, to I think London, but they are also incorporating another presence on some of this on some of these islands. So you see that kind of a dynamic where things that are broken in Africa have created have paved a runaway for cryptocurrencies to really take off here, to ride on the success of M-Pesa and to ride on the success of the frustrated unbanked. We shouldn't call them unbanked. We should call them the frustrated unbanked, because they're very frustrated. And you know, it's funny that you're talking about unbanked, because if we're to speak about blockchain is part of the trust economy. So the unbanked did not trust the banks. So, but they are now trusting cryptocurrency because it's about trust. They are a lot more comfortable in kind of like hedging or attaching their assets to crypto, because it's kind of like detached from the traditional system that they didn't trust up until now. So those are some of the dynamics. If I was to give you a short answer, I'll say in the West, you are a bit spoiled by the level of convenience that you've had, and therefore you end up kind of like the last part. Not only are you spoiled by the convenience of the plastic money, but there's also powers that be on the regulatory side that have been quite concerned and losing quite a bit of sleep in terms of what's going to happen to their interests. Because let's face it, the central banks do not exist in isolation. There are certain market forces or certain families, if I may, that have got a stake on the trajectory of the central bank, and therefore have attached their interest to the dollar or their interest to the pound. So those power centers are really being rattled by the adoption of this really, really democratized currency. That's what I refer to the cryptocurrencies as. So there are some concerns. There is some trouble in paradise from a power dynamic. But here we are. And I think the last point on that crypto thing is the question into 2022. Are we going to allow more dynamics of Ripple and Binance and other and other surprises? Even Nigeria had the central bank actually placed a moratorium. Are we as a sector, as a blockchain, Are we going to begin a journey towards self-regulation? I mean, after all, we are using a transparent mechanism. We are using a transparent ledger to create these tokens, to mine the crypto, and also to create this see-through supply chain. So by default, a blockchain community member is really more inclined to be transparent. I just don't understand why we didn't self-organize at greater scale to really self-regulate ourselves. Although now we are seeing a lot of support come in for Ripple and create a lot of discomforts for both the judiciary and also the I think it's the SEC. So we are seeing a lot of support come through, but I wish the support came through earlier before there was trouble in paradise. And I'm also keen to see in 2022 whether we're going to just extend our global brotherhood and come around each other, because for mass adoption to happen, we have to assure the end user public that this is not a cowboy game. This is not a wild west. We are actually very accountable, and we are actually a lot more transparent. It's a lot more easier to track and trace a currency as an asset on the blockchain rather than do it on the fiat route. So yeah, I'm keen to see what the dynamic is in 2022.
Yeah, and I think it's also incredible that blockchain and cryptocurrency has been able, in many ways, to resolve those gaps of the frustrated, underbanked, populations in other parts of the world. And we've also now seen examples of, let's say, the convenience and trappings of the financial services industry has also demonstrated to be a big roadblock in the way of progress, many times as well. I mean, now they're starting to come out with their own instruments like ETFs for Bitcoin. Just buy Bitcoin. Like that's what I see. Like Morgan Stanley and maybe some of these other coming out with like ETFs for like there's like an ETF like for Bitcoin, an ETF for like Ethereum. I'm like, come on, really? Really?
Yeah. I call that the Pied Piper effect. I call that because for the longest time, we as a global village were kind of like, okay, if the Pied Piper is playing a tune and these fiat currencies are solving our problems back then and are meeting the demands we had back then, but here is 2021 going to 2022. We want more transparency, we want more ease, and we just want a more decentralized way that actually puts power in our hands. So the Pied Piper cannot tell us that, no, I'm actually not going to change the tune anytime soon because I still have to benefit out of this. So there are those tantrums that are coming from the Pied Piper's office, whoever is occupying that office. But hopefully, the majority of the people win from a democracy perspective.
And you know what? You mentioned something very interesting, and this is a recurring theme that I have heard and received either from other tech leaders and other guests on the show, whether it's in Latin America, whether it's in Eastern Europe, and actually whether it's in Africa. People do have a healthy distrust of banks. And to be honest, I think that is good because I think maybe to an extent in Europe and the US, there is a complacency, and that might just come from the convenience. So most people feel like, oh, I don't want to, get into Bitcoin or Ethereum. I don't know about it. It seems like alchemy to me. It's probably too risky. And then you have banks who come out with high interest checking accounts and you get less than 1%. That's not a high interest checking account to me. You buy Bitcoin on a good day, you're making like a 15% plus return.
Transfer. I mean, if you look at the transfer costs, where some of these whales, they will move like $1 billion plus worth of Bitcoin from one wallet to the next. I mean, what are these transaction fees if you're to look at? So they're like close to nothing. So yeah, I think on the fund side is on the crypto side, but I think the traditional financial services has also not only brought complacency, but I think it's also holding captive the what do you call it, the Western community at a barrel of a gun in a way, because ask yourself this question: your mortgage is with the bank, Your vehicle is with the bank, and even your children's school fees. Some of them, there's some subsidies in there. So you are tied in way too deeply. And I'm gonna say this for comical reasons. You are already so deeply in bed with the bank mafia. So you can't ask for out now. You cannot.
Right.
You made
You're
your
in too
choice
deep already.
There we go.
Yeah.
You're into you can't just up and go. I mean, we are gonna destroy you. We're gonna recall the car, recall the house, recall a whole lot of these things. And even some of the international holidays that you were taking, they were tied to your credit card and all this mileage. So most of the people in the West are into deep. So some of their fear or their cringe comes from some subconscious level of knowing how into deep they are with the bank, but also psychologically and socially. When you've done business with someone for 5 decades, I will frown upon you if you say you're going to leave at a drop of
Right.
It doesn't make sense. So I do understand the close bonded relationship among the Western community and the traditional financial services. However, with that being said, I think there is a rising distrust, not just between the traditional Western consumer and the bank, but also vehicles of authority are being questioned with the pandemic. Excuse me, with the pandemic. Who am I referring to? The government is now being put on the how do I put this? In court, you've got
they're being put under a magnifying glass more so than ever.
Put on the magnifying glass is being put on the witness stand to say, do you really have our best interest at heart? And by the way, as the government, you are linked to the central bank, who's linked to the SEC, and who actually bailed out the banks after the meltdown in 2008. So you guys are at the same table.
Yeah.
So you're actually on the same WhatsApp group, if I put it that way. So if you're on the same WhatsApp group, and there's also all these levels of rising dissatisfaction in terms of how COVID was handled or not handled. So that is kind of like COVID itself is kind of like amplifying the glaring gaps in the global supply chains, number one. Two, COVID is also kind of like driving a wedge, or how it is responded to or not responded to is driving a wedge between traditional seats of authority and the people. Let's just call them the people. And so people are asking questions that they never asked before. Does my government mean well towards me? I don't want to delve into what the potential answers are there because it's just a rabbit hole. But all those things, they are evolving into the question of what's most important to me, which is my wallet, my money, you see? Because if you touch my wallet, you touch my money, you've touched a power center in my household. So people are evolving that distrust, firstly with their body, where I've actually taken 2 vaccinations. I'm what do you call it? I'm not an anti-vaxxer. I've actually been vaccinated, but I can't say the same about my neighbors. My neighbors are going through a conundrum of this invasive element that has to come into my body. Now I have to wear a mask. I have to be vaccinated. But he didn't explain it the way I understand it. He used a top-down approach of be vaccinated or else we're going to regulate you out of the mall, regulate you out of public transport, regulate you out of soccer matches. So there is that dynamic, a discomfort that governments and traditional institutions are navigating. And everything leads back to money. Everything leads back to money.
Well, well put. And like you said, COVID-19 has really exacerbated and increased the size of these structural cracks that we're seeing here. So, you look at the 2008 bailouts of the big banks. Why are we incentivizing that type of malfeasance and failure? People lost their houses, people lost their retirement funds, people lost so much, but there's a golden parachute for that. For instance, if you look at, you could say,
I was laughing.
Yes.
I was laughing because we are essentially saying the mafia must not go to jail. That's what we are saying. We are saying
Yeah.
no. Just a gentle slap on the wrist of the
Right.
mafia.
Well, the mafia owns the bank essentially, so it's a mafia bank, like in movies.
That's why I was
So
laughing, but it's heartbreaking how many
it
people even
is.
lost their lives. I mean, the suicides, the
All
meltdown,
those numbers went up greatly.
the family structure in America and other parts of the world has taken such a brute force with the meltdown that I don't think the family unit has ever been the same since then.
No, and this is probably the byproduct of 35, 40 plus years
Yeah,
of terrible, I guess you could say, politics, lawmaking, and policy in this country. You
yeah,
know, the U.S. used to be quite liquid, and then I think from the mid 70s going forward, really debt instruments have really been running this economy, so to say. And
your debt to
with the
GDP ratio,
hyperinflation,
very, yeah,
yeah, and with excuse me, and with the hyperinflation, and I guess you could say the banks having unfettered ability to print as much currency as possible, and that's also because gold is no longer the collateral for our
it's no
central
longer the
banks.
standard. The gold
So,
standard is gone.
right, so as a central bank, you can print as much currency as possible. And I guess instead of, let's say, provide real solutions, let's provide debt instruments in the guise of, oh, these are really things here to help you out. But no, these really are kind of more like dead weights tied to your leg. They're just going to keep pulling you down and pulling you down as time goes on. And if you look at Congress, people nowadays are questioning more than ever. And if you look at the major lobbies in Congress, this
Yeah.
goes well beyond a Democrat and Republican thing. And I think, in fact, all of them all hang out at the same probably 3 or 4 country clubs together.
There we
And they
go.
probably laugh behind closed doors because I think a lot of this is theater, practically speaking. But, when you have, let's say, big pharma, you have, gas, and you have guns, as you mentioned it before too.
There we
Those
go.
are the major lobbies, and that's really the money behind a lot of, I guess you could say, laws that are pushed through. So it has to make you wonder, is the government acting in the best interests of people? You can look at, let's say, the war in Afghanistan and the
Yeah.
horrendous withdrawal. You look at Iraq. You can literally look at the military history of the past maybe 50 or 60 years, and you look at the lobbies and the money behind a lot of that stuff. All of these effects hurt the average everyday economy for the average everyday person here. This ends up causing huge price spikes,
There we go.
huge increases in milk and bread and meat. These even cause huge increases in childcare costs, child
There we go.
mortality, and as you mentioned, increased rates of depression, alcoholism, drug
Absolutely.
abuse, so to
Absolutely.
say. And you would
Yeah.
think as time goes on, these numbers, I guess you could say, in a first world democratic society, these numbers
Yes.
should be getting smaller over time. They should
There we
be.
go. There we go.
And
Yeah.
in
Talking about
fact,
the num-
yeah.
Yeah.
No,
You can
continue.
go ahead. Yes. Talking about the numbers.
No, that was it. That's what I was going to say.
Yes. Talking about the numbers. COVID has also placed the magnificence on a certain part of society that we were not thinking it would. COVID was not just a health crisis, if I can put it that way.
Right.
COVID was a trigger of a financial crisis of sorts. COVID,
Yeah.
however, or the after effects of it, placed democracy on the stand again. And I think if COVID
That's a
had
very
to
good point. Yeah.
ask a question about democracy, you were conceived in Greece thousands of years ago. But if I put it to you,
Right.
would you really be fully realized without being on the decentralized ledger? Could we really enter in the
Right.
spirit of it if it is not implemented on the blockchain technology ecosystem. Let me put it, I mean, do we know who is passing the votes to maybe
that should especially be on a blockchain.
There we go. I mean, if we're to look at how the Obamacare, as they call it, the Obamacare bill was navigated or negotiated, if that happened on the blockchain, and we would know who voted, who lobbied. I mean, the worst
Right.
fear in any lobbyist is that the decisions that, or rather the discussions that are happening in the golf clubs around Capitol Hill, they will show up
Right.
on the ledger somewhere. So really, but without the ledger, can we truly say we have government by people, for the people, in the interest of the people? If the people are locked out of the room, they are blind spotted from not seeing what the monopoly effects of this banking ecosystems, manufacturers, and all this. So without a decentralized economy and without a truth and a trust machine, democracy was falling short in terms of what it was intended. I mean, we even have contested things here in Africa. We have elections where people go like, I don't think that the pendulum swung in that direction. I wish that the vote counting all happened away from the laws of the dictator in whatever reality. Sometimes it's not even an authoritarian or purely dictator. Even in healthy democracies like South Africa, there has been some question marks that were on some of our vote counting in these recent votes that we had. So you ask yourself, can democracy withstand the test of time for the next 200 years if it doesn't evolve into the decentralized ledger? So there are the unintended and unforeseen COVID effects.
That is very well put. And I would posit this to anybody. I think we all have to remember these politicians, whether it's in the US, whether it's in South Africa, whether it's in East Asia, these people are not your friends. And, democracy is supposed to be the bulwark that keeps people honest. It's a structure. And it seems to me blockchain might actually be really the Hail Mary and saving grace of democracy if it is to really endure for the next 100 years, because the level of accountability is unmatched with a blockchain. So you could imagine, if you could imagine in Washington, D.C., every senator and every congresswoman and congressman, their voting records and bills that they wrote and co-sponsored, if that was on a public ledger, who was present for votes, who is the most absent during voting, I mean, that would have to be their nightmare. The level of transparency and accountability, that would inevitably keep people honest, or at least as honest as possible. And what I'm saying is, like, you have to be of the mind that these people are not your friends. And I'm sure if we were to put everybody's voting record, every bill that an individual senator or congressperson co-sponsored or wrote, or senators that are most absent, and congressmen that are most absent from voting, or what they vote for, if that is specifically on an open, decentralized ledger, trust me, that senator or congressperson might think twice before, I guess you could say, receiving endorsements from, let's say, Exxon, for instance, or Raytheon, or let's say Pfizer, for instance. There
we go. So talking about
people can see that.
Talking about the incentives. There's I think most Africans are experts on this issue of corruption. Experts by observation. Although some are expert by participation.
Right.
So I think talking about Enron and the Watergate scandal and all those other scandals that plagued America, Exxon rather, and so I think if you think about it, is that for corruption to take place, there has to be that little door that is kind of like left, kind of like slightly cracked open.
Right.
Or what is the likelihood of me getting away with this if I do it? Who would know? Who would know? And what's the likelihood of being caught? So the minute you bring see-through mechanisms, Dubai right now, Dubai has evolved 3 of their government infrastructures and framework onto the blockchain already. Three.
Right. Yeah. A lot of
Absolutely.
impressive things going on in Dubai.
I'm
to
telling
say the
you.
least.
So they are
Yeah.
realizing, and you know what? They've got something going for them. When you are stuck in a hot desert, your mindset works very differently to people.
Yeah, I could bet.
To
Right.
people that are a bit comfortable. You are
Right.
stuck on a hot desert and you're thinking that for the world to visit me, I have to punch beyond my weight. I've got all
Right.
these
You gotta
friends-
you gotta keep punching upward. Yeah.
gotta keep punching upward.
Yeah.
Your glass skyscrapers have to be taller, and
Right.
your air conditioning bill has to be higher. But
Your ambition has to be greater. You know.
your transparency has to be crystal
Right.
clear. You gotta hold yourself accountable. So
Right.
there you go.
Absolutely. Yeah, and you know, especially speaking of Dubai, you know, their recent leadership has been very forward-thinking and progressive in pushing these
Very,
projects forward. And
very.
in fact, they've really demonstrated themselves as really a welcoming hub for people
There we
from
go.
all over the world to come and invest and build business there, which I think should be the goal. I mean, listen, at the end of the day, behind these startups, you know,
Yeah.
there's husbands, there's wives, there's brothers and
There is.
sisters trying to,
Yes.
you know, take care of their families and really trying
Absolutely.
to, you know, achieve their dreams. So, you
Yeah.
know, so I can only commend that type
Yeah.
of success and direction. Like you made the comparison, you know, to the desert. You know, historically, you know, Dubai has been a country for not too long. Really, I think since the mid 20th century, and
Yeah,
really
very
has
good.
not become such a huge megacity type presence until maybe 15, 20 years ago. And this was an
Absolutely.
area that had really predominantly sand, really nothing as far as natural resources. And you see kind of the economic miracle that occurred
Yeah.
there, building
Absolutely.
something great from
Yeah.
essentially the least amount of, I think you could say, access to resources and the least amount of convenience. I think there is
Absolutely.
something to be learned there, to say the very
Definitely.
least.
And lately, they are also, before reconfiguring themselves as a tech hub that is also putting its name in the hat within the blockchain space, they have also been very intentionally trying to sway the financial power center in their favor. Between London and New York, they are bidding between London, New York, and Singapore,
Right.
or even Malaysia. They are trying to really sway things in the Dubai's favor to become both a finance hub and a tech hub. So lately,
Oh, yeah.
they're coming in very hard. So I would say, I mean, we mentioned the word complacency earlier on in terms of adoption of blockchain. I think that was more on the people, but I think that the decision makers, policymakers, and even those that are in power across the West, they have to watch not only Dubai, because China is also the biggest blockchain investments in the world today. 50% of them are in China,
Yeah.
because
A
China
lot
has
of
been
liquidity are coming from Chinese firms, to say the least.
There we go.
Yeah.
So a lot of equity, a lot of low-hanging fruits there. So I think what COVID has also done, it has also pushed a lot of us to the edge of the seat, where we have to really rethink whether we're going to swim or sink. When I say we, I'm talking about startup leaders, I'm talking about political leaders. Nobody is safe now. This new pandemic-proofed economy or pandemic-proofed future that we have to kind of like create out of this virtual metaverse across the world, it's going to be the kind of a reality where nobody is safe, nobody can hide, and there's just a greater demand for accountability. There's also a greater demand for innovation. And I think when it comes to innovation, Israel comes to mind, because when the Jewish community resettled in Israel in the early 60s, they did not realize whether someone is pro-Israel or not, but here's some hard facts. They didn't realize that the level of hostility that they were going to get from their neighbors. So what did that do from an innovation perspective? The military and the government and the startup community created a drive-through effect between each other. They minus red tape, because just like those guys that are stuck in the desert, in
Right.
Dubai, Israel realized that if we've got all this corporate BS among each other, and we've got a
Right.
lot of tape, we are all going to die. Like, it's
Yeah.
either we're going to innovate our way out of this. If military needs innovations that only the startup community can come up with, they need that. And if the startup needs resources that maybe the government can act as a, what do you call it, as a collateral, they can get that. Now, as to what they're using that innovation for is a question for another day. But
Right.
as of now, per capita, in terms of what do you call it, unique, in terms of thriving startups, Israel is always among the top 3. So as an innovation ecosystem, they have really lowered the walls between government and the startup and the military and the people. So the walls are lowered, not just to innovate for the military, but to innovate in general. That's why Microsoft, Intel, HP, and most of the American companies, their second stronghold outside America, where they've got the best of breed, is in Israel. So
Yeah,
one has
that's
to
right.
look at a bit of the innovation muscle memory of Israel, combined with the edge of seat of that hot desert called Dubai, and
Right.
combined with the maybe one may call it a very tough approach by China to really bulldoze their way into being a tech leader. I mean, lately Google has been losing some awards from an AI perspective to some Chinese firms. So maybe Google got a bit comfortable, but there is China once again punching beyond its weight and really trying to be that indispensable leader. Now, the political subtleties of that from the People's Republic is a story for another day. But between Dubai and Israel and China, and not leaving India, when you see how all these economies are trying to reinvent themselves, I think a lesson for our political elders, a lesson for our industry elders, and a lesson for us as startups is, are we going to reinvent ourselves, or are we going to kind of like say, oh yeah, we're just going to wear a mask? A mask cannot recuse you from being innovative.
Wow, well put. And there's 2 quotes I want to throw out there. So they say necessity is the mother of invention. And the second quote I heard, I'm not entirely sure who said it, but it goes as this: the Third World War is not going to be fought with guns, it's going to be fought with data. So if you look at what's going on right now, China has the monopoly, practically speaking, as being essentially the data and AI giants of the world.
Yeah.
And if you look at the history of Israel, one of their most, I guess you could say, profound and impressive industries was actually their defense industry. So they are one of the most preeminent and dominant arms manufacturers in the world. And part of it was, I think, as you mentioned, the necessity, so to say, starting from the wars in the early 60s and onwards. And these are arms that, the US and the UK and all other countries, buy from. Like, for instance, I'm a huge fan of a lot of 80s and 90s action movies. So, so you think like Arnold Schwarzenegger and Sylvester Stallone and stuff like that.
Terminator.
Yeah, the Desert Eagle, which is like one of the most popular guns in movies. That was an Israeli-created gun about probably 40 years ago. And that is, a big staple piece in action movies. But, they within a very short period of time became a military superpower, literally creating arms on the spot in the middle of these wars, so to say. And, like Dubai, creating the mega city, the mega region, I'll say mega region that it is, the UAE, with, I guess, necessity being the mother of invention, it really causes the human being to really, I guess you could say, put their potential on overdrive, because of survival, and really come up and evolve and adapt with some great things.
That is brilliant. So the question becomes, are we going to bury our head in the sand, or are we going to reinvent ourselves? And I think also, talking about Israel and being a defense hub, one of the social qualities that came out of Israel, from some of the conversations I've had with some people that are based there, is that there's also a certain level of resilience in an Israeli mindset and in an Israeli startup founder that sometimes you don't find it elsewhere. And I'm gonna qualify it as some of the what do you call it, the military service that the youth, when they reach 18, have to serve in the military. It kind of like gifts them with a certain level of resilience and military precision that goes on. They bring that into the boardroom. They bring that military precision into the boardroom, and they almost become a bit unstoppable. And let me qualify it with a scenario. One of the gentlemen was telling me that in Israel, while they're on the freeway, going to a meeting. This was like before COVID. It's like 2015. They're just driving on the freeway. And the next thing, on the radio, there's an interruption to the broadcast that says that there's an incoming missile that has been detected. So everybody has to stop and jump out of their cars and slip into the bunkers on the side of the road and further notice. And then boom, the missile is neutralized, and then the radio signals come through again. What do you call it? Phone notifications, and also on the phone to say we've neutralized it. What does an Israeli co-founder do? Just dust themselves, get back in the car, and they're still on time for the meeting. So if you are to look at some of the conveniences that we've had, I mean, even in Africa, let me speak about Africa. There comes a point where in Africa, as emerging leaders and as the what do you call it, as the founders and the solutionists and innovators, we have to at some point go like, colonialism happened. So what? We have to drive away from the accident scene. We have to drive away from the crime scene. The crime happened. So when do we drive away from the crime scene and innovate despite what colonialism did or did not do? When do we do that? So, I mean, all of us, we've got certain things going for us. And when you come to the US, that peach farm that you now call Silicon Valley, that peach farm has given you a what do you call it, something that lacks in the rest of the world, of having rolled out tech disruptions at scale in a very well collaborated manner, whereby between what do you call it, government efforts and universities, your MIT, your Harvard, and others, even those that are not graduates, but that peach farm, what you did on that peach farm is still unparalleled. We've got Silicon Cape here in South Africa, but we lack that. Maybe it's because we didn't set it up on a peach farm, you know. We lack that level of tenacity and that level of scale, that level of appetite, and maybe call it bravery. So every country today has got certain things going for it. The question is, as we take our masks off into 2022, 2023, are we going to go in there guns blazing, or would we have lost a piece of ourselves in the middle of the COVID crisis? Hopefully not.
That is very beautifully put, I have to say. And I would say, going off of that, you know, whether in the US or whether you're in South Africa, you don't want, I guess you could say, you don't want the bad chapters to tell your story. You want to create your own story, for instance. So if you're in America, you know, for instance, you don't want to define your life saying the 2008 economy destroyed everything for me. Or even, let's say, COVID-19 destroyed everything for me, you know, for instance. Or, you know, whether you're in, let's say in Western or South Africa, you know, you don't want the history and chapter of colonialism to speak for you and your success, you know, going forward. So whether it's in the US or whether it's anywhere else in the world, you know, 2022 going forward, go forward, guns blazing, and don't let the history and the events of poor leaders and events dictate your next chapter, so to say. Because listen, if you were to go on social media here, Twitter, Instagram, you will see people posting stuff, and maybe in some cases rightfully so. Their lives were destroyed by COVID-19. You know, lives were destroyed by the recessions. True. But it's game over if you're going to end your story on that. If that is what you're going to hold out in front of you going forward, then that is your limitation. That is where essentially the game stops for you. You know, so to say. it ends up becoming a handicap. And I think mindset and self-talk is very, very important. I mean, you can go on any social media platform, you'll see the despair of people from
Yeah.
all parts of the world because of what's going on, you know.
Yes.
And
But
you know,
yes.
yes, no, go on.
But I mean, I've got two things that I want to put out there. Let's
Sure.
call it towards the crypto community. Let's talk to our brothers and sisters out there that are within the crypto community. That resilience where the bad chapters don't tell your story. I love that. I love that. And in keeping with that same note, I took some notes here. In keeping with
I
that,
saw
yes, in keeping with that is that recently, few years ago, the sport of spinning cars, or rather the practice of spinning cars, has been in South Africa since the early 90s with the BMW 3 Series, the very first one.
Yeah.
We even have a name for it in South Africa. They call it a gusheshe. So the practice of spinning the car, it was initially a tradition of what do you call it, of bank robbers and hijackers, but it has now evolved into mainstream culture in society. And recently, I think, what do you call it, a certain broadcasting network from Britain came to South Africa and covered this sport, and they call it reckless. And of course, my neighbors protested and said, listen, jumping out of airplanes is reckless, but you actually give it a different name, so please leave our sport alone. But whether people are for or against the spinning of cars, a girl of about 18 said something during the interview that stayed with me that I feel like the crypto community, the blockchain community needs to hear as we emerge out of this COVID crisis to really do some great things on the other side of this and innovate like crazy. She said, you know what she does? She does something. I think she's got a name for this move. She's got two moves. One is called the Superman move, where she climbs out of the car while it's spinning. She grabs it on the side like this. It's mad. But the other one, I think she calls it a floating move. She actually extends most of her body out of the car while it's spinning. There's no driver. She's the driver.
Oh, wow.
She spins out, and her hair actually mops the tarmac. So one mistake, she'll be dead, but she doesn't.
Yeah.
So one thing that she said that I want to put out there to our crypto sisters and brothers is that she said when she climbs out of that car, she cannot doubt herself. The moment she climbs out of the car and she faces the tarmac, and she's like just inches away from the tarmac.
That's just like sudden death if she just starts like,
she can't doubt herself. She can't second guess herself. So the crypto community, those of us that have been leading from the front lines, yes, we took some arrows from harsh regulations. We took some arrows from negative media publicity. We took some arrows from being misunderstood. Which innovator has not been misunderstood in the past? So we need to stop the crybaby mindset. We need to get back to the front lines and innovate, because that's what innovators do, and solve problems, because that's what problem solvers do. That's what solutionists do. And with that being said, maybe we need a bit of recovery during this festive season to take care of the heart, because even those that aim the arrows at us or aimed their blazing guns in the form of lobbying, where they were lobbying against us in any part of the globe, we still have to sit with them at the same table and co-create the future we want. We cannot body tackle them anymore. We cannot body tackle them with our words. We cannot create a culture, a toxic culture of them and us. I mean, there will be some unpopular faces at that economic dinner table where we are evolving our future onto the blockchain. But with that being said, can we maybe put the arrows down and not be toxic back to those that out of insecurity, they were toxic towards us? We have to show the atmosphere of maybe forgiveness, and we also have to show the atmosphere of still extending a hand and tell the mainstream economy that we still want to create some fascinating things with you. So whether you're coming or not, we are ready. But until then, we are going to co-create the future we want on our own metaverse, on our own blockchain. That is what I wanted to put out there to our fellow innovators, fellow founders, and fellow startup leaders.
And that's beautifully put. And, to add to that, I think we all need to appreciate, I think we're all more capable and powerful than we think. And I know it's easy to think otherwise, but, I don't think anything good comes out of letting the news or letting leaders tell you, how to think. Because, to be honest, there is with everything that's going on, there is a vested interest in people disliking each other. You see it all across the world, right now. And I think there's also many examples in history of how people of different backgrounds came together and actually were able to punch back and, essentially, really punch back and cause a knockout, so to say. I like to throw this example in there, and this is probably an example that's over 2,000 years old. So if you remember ancient Roman Spartacus, the famous, essentially, gladiator slave rebellion, so to say, for instance, okay? So, we're talking about the early days of the Roman Empire, and they were essentially from conquered territories taking slaves from as far north as England and Scotland, and as far south as Central Africa, and as far east as almost Iran. So, essentially Romans taking them, either throwing them in gladiator arenas, throwing them into hard labor, building things like the Colosseum, or essentially using them as meat shields in battle, so to say. So, okay. This is the most dangerous enemy. You guys go out in front, and then we'll see what happens afterwards. And if you look at the famous Spartacus rebellion, he almost overthrew Rome and the emperor by essentially uniting all of these different captives and slaves from different parts. And we're talking about 2,000 years ago. So you're telling me that people from different cultures, different gods, different languages rallied together and almost really took down, if not the greatest known power in the West back then. If people could do it back then, I think people now can figure out how to create solutions together. And I think we also need to look outside of our neighborhood. There is always something to be learned from somebody else. You talk about the Israeli resilience mindset. I'll tell you this. We need to have more of that in the world, to say the least. That type of resilient, mindset, to say the least. And, maybe, let's say if we look at the UAE and Dubai, maybe we need to have more of that necessity and innovation mindset, not limit ourselves based on what's in front of us, because listen, let's be honest. If we look at the history of the UAE, they would maybe rightfully so have an excuse. There's no natural resources out here. We can't build a city here. People are like, that's probably right. They didn't define themselves by that. And look at now, leading the charge on tech and innovation in the world.
Talking about warfare, you're taking me back to Greece, where the Spartans, when you speak warfare, you remind me of the Spartans. I think one of the things that drove the Spartans to become such war machines, evolving from being villagers to being war machines, and they were a contender of note, is because they were joined by a common purpose. If you put aside their military skill set, they had an elevated view, and they had a bigger picture. They knew that they had to conquer land that will become agricultural supply chains for them, for their people back home to really get some crops. So I think, I know that some people, they said realism in its old state need some rethink, whereby the purpose that Shadrack or Adam want to make it has to be bigger than themselves, has to be making the world better. And that's why you and I have got such a brotherly bond. Has to be making the world better, more visible, and more just a better cohesion. So I think when we come together and see ourselves as a crypto community, not just some community online that is just throwing some darts at the powers that be, we need to become a real community and be driven by a goal of making the world better, or living it in a better state than the state it was in when it was only fiat currencies doing the rounds, and when it was only silos, not decentralized ledgers, doing the rounds. So I think I'm seeing that that cohesion happening without borders.
Right, and you know what? I could probably provide perhaps even a slightly more recent example. So, if you think about the notion of guerrilla warfare, there
Yes.
are many examples, but I think one of the most underappreciated examples was actually the African warlord Shaka Zulu from 200 years ago, defeating the
Yes.
British in
Yes.
South Africa. Now,
Yes.
now whoever invented guerrilla warfare, it's been demonstrated at different parts in different societies throughout the world. But
Yes.
in a modern sense, Shaka Zulu defeated the British in South Africa 200 years
There
ago.
we
He was
go.
a warlord. And by the way,
Absolutely.
he united numerous different groups, numerous
Yeah.
different languages, and was
There we go.
fighting against the most powerful army in the world at the time. So, if you look
Yeah.
at the British's track record, they defeated the French, they defeated the Spanish, they defeated the Dutch.
Yeah.
So, these are not, in a historical sense, these aren't small fries. They were defeating other superpowers,
Yeah.
So, how did somebody like Shaka Zulu, let's say, reach out to other groups, reach out to other tribes,
Yeah.
ally, and create a coalition of people, and even
Absolutely.
evolve warfare? He actually
And
created a special type of shield, a special type of
and in the
spear, special type of
and
club.
also those
Yeah.
techniques and the brave mindset helped him to evolve the Zulu nation from 1,200 or so to 10
Yeah.
million.
Yeah, absolutely. So, when fighting against, let's say, troops that are organized in a line,
Yeah.
muskets firing forward, coming at that type of force in a straight line is not a good idea, even if you have guns, so to say.
There
So,
we go.
so, essentially, guerrilla warfare with essentially this modified and evolved spear, special type of
Yes.
spear, and the club.
Yes.
And, to be honest, at close quarters,
That's true.
I'm sorry, muskets are useless. In close quarters, they're
Look at that.
absolutely useless.
Yes.
And, you could put, let's say, historically, a bayonet at the top. It is way too long,
Yeah.
especially
you're
given
right.
the terrain.
You're right.
So,
Yeah.
talking about innovation, so to say, if there was, let's say, not somebody like Shaka Zulu, and if there was not a coalition, so to say, let's say the history would be much different. Then it's easier for, let's say, a bigger force to kind of conquer and divide everybody separately, so to say.
There we go.
So, I love history, so I could talk about, like, things like this all day, but,
I love the history. I love the history component and how at home you are. But I think I also picked up in one of our previous conversations that you are also in, what do you call it? Is it a sports trainer?
Oh, yeah.
Yes. So I think you're also comfortable around combat as well. You understand
Probably a lot from my
combat.
childhood, growing up on those movies and stuff.
There you go. I think if in 2022 or down the line, I hear of the crypto community self-organizing themselves into a bit of a war machine in order to counter the propaganda and in order to counter the systematic forces that are coming against the crypto movement, because we are a community, we are also a movement, whether crypto or blockchain. If I hear that we are self-organizing somehow on an island somewhere, I think I'm going to recommend you for the role of a military general to advise to advise the pushback, to advise the pushback, given your superior upper hand understanding of both warfare, of history, and also of innovation and human behavior. I take my hat off.
Thank you. Well, I'll tell you this, Shadrack. I think if I do anything of that grandiosity or of that sort, I would definitely want to have you on my side. I think with the amount of success and the partners that you've been able to get onto your project, Coronet Blockchain, I think you have really the leadership and speaking ability to get partners in the form of a coalition together, to say the very least. So, without a doubt, you are masterful at bringing people to the table, and that is one of the most necessary ingredients. Nobody's an island. Nobody can do any of these great things, themselves. We're all as good as our team, so to say.
We found ourselves having to solution through blockchain a fragmented industry that existed in a bit of a hostile environment. So even though it's not a war zone per se, but some powers that be within the manufacturer community, they wanted to keep their shenanigans in there, even at the expense of the consumer. So yeah, building Coronet blockchain has been quite an epic experience, and bringing Coronet blockchain to market has been an even more epic experience. So yes, having taken the errors, having taken the criticism at first, but later on evolving all the errors into a credible buy-in and building an industry visibility in the process has been quite epic. And if I have to be of service to the community in order to see more solution adoption, even to see the likes of Pina Pay, kind of like be on steroids and other emerging solutions, I'll be more than glad to report for service, because we are stronger together. That is one thing that's taking away from this, from the industry itself, coming under such harsh attack, even whilst the industry is gaining such incredible momentum. I mean, we are already finding ways around, what do you call it, the impact of Bitcoin on climate change. We're already finding ways around that. So we are solutioning left, right, and center. So I think I'll be more than glad, in the words of an action movie, to have a double impact.
I was just watching that last night too, Jean-Claude Van Damme. It was on Amazon Prime, so I was watching that last night.
It would be better to have a double impact. There we go.
Honestly, I think our minds are linked. Seriously.
There we go.
That is great.
There is that tethering. There is that element. This has really been incredible. It's been a great catch up with my brother, even with our
likewise, my brother too,
listening in, and of course Crypto with English, and even communities beyond this immediate ecosystem. I'm glad that we could compare notes in what looks like a virtual cockpit as we commandeer this flight of bringing awareness, bringing understanding, and just lifting the needle on the unity across the community and the movement.
Right. And, listen, I'll leave you with this before you go. So you're talking about being stronger together. Well, I mean, think of it like a hand or like a fist. Fingers in of themselves, they're kind of delicate. They're fragile. It's very easy to break. And as soon as you close it, you have essentially a weapon, the most primitive of weapons that, from on the low end could be 100 PSI or even up to 800 or 900 PSI in like a professional fighter. You think like Mike Tyson or Muhammad Ali and great athletes, great athletes, such as that. And, you talked about warfare too, the first Homo sapiens were discovered in Africa, and they're dated about 40,000 years. So let's say we have 40,000 years of human history. Yeah. Well, maybe until the 20th century, in some ways, the world has become less warlike. But you also have to remember, this also does not discount the 40,000 years of very violent human history that's in anybody, in any part of the world. So even though, let's say, today in the tech world, we may not be fighting with swords and spears and axes and shields, but let's say if it's the startup community versus the the political banking machine, that's going to be a kind of war that's going to be fought with money. It's going to be fought with ideas. It's going to be fought with innovation. And you know what? It's going to be fought with courage, because it's going to separate who's resilient enough to keep going and who's not. So I think we should probably end it here. But listen, Shadrack, it's been an immense pleasure.
I'm taking notes. Whenever you speak, my pen and paper is out. Whenever you speak.
Thank you. Listen, and by the way, let's get on another call soon. Let's talk about 2022 and let's see what we can work on together. I really do think you have a great project with Coronet blockchain and supply chain solutions. Trust me, that is going to be at the forefront for a long time going forward.
Which is everything. Definitely. I'm looking forward to that. I'm looking forward to our catch up on that. Look at 2022 together and just come through the grass to see what can emerge out of that. And it has to be a double impact. We are stronger together. You can see that.
And I love that movie too. And like I said, I was literally just watching it. So we'll both be Van Damme in this chapter.
Brilliant. Bring it on. Here comes the African version of Van
That's
Damme.
right.
Nice to see
That's
you.
right.
There we go. No, I love it. No, it has been brilliant. It has been brilliant.
It has.
I must thank you once again, not just for this discussion, but for kind of like what do you call it? For investing in the community to make sure
Yeah.
that you create this tangible platform that brings like-minded together. I think not long ago you interviewed what do you call it? A guest from Russia at some
Yes.
point. Yes, and then so you bring all these perspectives that are in the best interest of the greater movement. You know, your
Thank you.
selflessness to look beyond the desk and to look beyond Pinape and to look beyond your immediate interests and to put the community first makes you a legend. So I want to thank you for that.
Thank you, man. Well, listen. I think even between me and you, I think we got a lot of goals and a lot of things to accomplish. So let's
Definitely.
start brainstorming those, and let's
Let's
get on
do that.
another
Let's
call
do that.
soon. And
Definitely.
let's see. And
I'll look out
listen.
for that.
As far as what we're talking about, we'll start here,
Brilliant.
and we'll see how
There
large
it is.
two
That's our
can become
point.
over time.
Brilliant. That's fantastic. I'm looking forward to that.
Me too. Shadrack,
Fantastic.
take care. Have an awesome
Thank
weekend.
you kindly. You know what they say in Hollywood? To be continued.
To be continued. That's right. I'll be
Thank
back.
you so much. I love that. Definitely. Cheers, my brother. Thank you so
Take care,
much.
brother.
Thank you.
Bye.